Let's get into some stylized texturing that's going to be somewhat similar to how we've done texturing so far. As you can see here, I have my project already set up, and like before, I have a folder for each piece of the asset. And what I started doing is just adding a simple flat color to the piece I want to work on and giving the roughness value a maximum number. Then I added another slightly darker color, as I've shown you before, and added a generator to that color, choosing the curvature, and then making it slightly lower value so that it's somewhat very subtle. On top of that, we added another even darker color and the exact same process, except instead of curvature, we used ambient occlusion. And this is giving us a slightly nice colored base that was better than the simple default color that we had before. I'm just going to add one more on top of this one. And this one, I'm going to again remove these extra settings, add only a color, and this time I'm going to choose something that's slightly darker, maybe even the kind of shadows I want to have. Add a black mask and add a generator. I could use some other generators like light or position, but I'm going to use the world space normal map. And you're going to see that the world space normal map is going to essentially go through an entire position. Let's see if we can increase our contrast just a little bit. And you can see we're getting quite an interesting little stylized shape here. Now you might be wondering, why did in the beginning I go all the way to a maximum roughness value? And the reason for this was because I actually don't want to see almost any lighting information on this model. Because at this point, when I've gotten to this stage, I'm going to switch from the material view to the base color view. And the base color view is actually the only view I want to be using if I want to preview how the model is going to look right in the end. So you can see here that we don't have any lights or anything like that. We only have the color. And the color is having quite a good effect at the moment. Notice what happens when I start turning off all these layers that I added. We're back to our very base color, and the only thing you can see in our base color is the color itself, even though when I go to the material view, you can see the 3D details as well. That's because our base color does not show any of the other baked maps that we have in here, and none of the 3D details either that we paint on. The only thing that it shows is the color channel, and our color channel is simply, at the moment, a single color. Our slightly darkened color here is only going to appear where the curvature map dictates, and the curvature map highlights the sharp areas of the model, which is allowing us to essentially simulate some of these 3D details using only color. The ambient occlusion has a similar effect, as it will put darkening in where our higher resolution model actually had closeness with other objects or tight areas like here. And the very final one is our world space normal map. And our world space normal map simply applies a color from a direction, but with the high resolution model in mind, even though this is purely a low resolution model, as you can see here. And this way we can be in our base color, not our material, and still see a really nice version of our asset, and it does look somewhat stylized. I'm just going to add one more layer on here, and this one is going to be a bright one. So let's go to something like bright yellow orange, and again we want a black mask, and we want a generator, and we want a world space normal map. Now we don't want it to be quite so strong. Do we want it blurred? No, we don't, because blurring it doesn't really give us the effect we need. Put it up to here, and I keep trying to rotate the light because I feel like there is a light, but there isn't. Let's see what kind of light we actually want to use here. What about something slightly bright like this? Looks a bit Christmassy. And we can lower the intensity, and we can even change it to an overlay. Overlay. There we go. And now we have this nice little pleasant highlight on the top of the model here. And then I would go through this entire process for every other piece to create this base stylized texture. And I will do it once more just on the hoop. So let me go through the whole process. I will put a base color on the hoop, make sure that the hoop itself is only affecting what I want. And this hoop, I think I'm going to probably try to make golden at this point. I'll probably go for something like golden. We'll see how it goes. Then we're going to duplicate that, get a slightly darkened version of it, and it's less saturated as well. Add a generator, and make sure that we have our curvature set up. Our curvature we're going to probably extend a little bit so we get some of this interesting detailing, and maybe increase the sharpness just a little bit. This gold color needs to be adjusted a little bit. It's looking a little too mustard. And as I've always said, it's good to look at references, even if you're texturing something stylized. Then I'm going to reduce the intensity of this because I just want it to be a minor highlight. Now let's duplicate and get rid of this and simply darken the color a little more, maybe pull it a little bit towards the red. Add another generator and change it to Ambient Occlusion. And make sure we invert it so that it only affects this area. And we can increase the contrast just a little bit. Change it to a multiply, perhaps. Actually increase our value as well. To a multiply. And what we could do now, if we wanted to, we could add another paint layer on top of the generator. And using my brush, just rotating my screen here. Using my brush, I'm going to grab something like the artistic brush, going to make sure our flow is on but lowered quite significantly, and have our size to something workable. And I could press X to change my mouse to painting black or white on the mask, and I could start to lightly, I want this to be even lower, I can start to lightly remove or add areas of this mask, as you can see here. I can just manually start painting in these details. And in some areas, I can just paint them back in to create a slightly smoother blend. But you can see it's starting to look a little bit like a dirty kind of metal. And it's good to be switching between painting in and painting out. It's going to give you this nice mix of texture. Coming in from above like this, making sure we're getting what we need. Lightly pressing, we don't want to press too hard. There we go. Creating effects such as this. And we're almost there. I'm almost kind of smudging it a little bit even. And we have an interesting kind of effect going on here. But I would like it to be slightly weaker so that it's not such an excessive change. And the last thing I'm going to do is add another one. Now this one's going to be a little bit significantly darker, just to see where we can take this. Maybe just a little bit more towards the red. Not too much, not too much. There we go. Black mask, generator. Remember, this is all still in base color. We're not working in our material view yet. And we're going to do world space normal. I'm going to invert it because I want it to come from below. And we're going to do something like this. Now, something that I could do at this point is I could actually try and match some of the coloring from this higher object and pretend that we actually have a colored shadowing. And colored shadowing can be quite cool because it can give a very stylized look to any object. You see now when I turned that shadowy color purple, now we look like we have a very stylized, purpley shadowed texture that kind of has a slightly fantastical, mystical look to it. I'm just going to add one more, and I just want to see whether this effect is going to work the way I'm thinking it possibly might. Add black mask, add a generator, world space normal map, significantly less, and instead of being top to bottom, a little bit top to bottom, a little bit right to left, a little bit front to back. Maybe not so much front to back, huh? We want just a little bit, and we're creating this interesting highlight. Now I want to change this to color dodge, and I want to change this to a much brighter effect. Let's see if we lower it down to yellow. There we go. And now we have a very cool kind of golden look for this, just by messing around with how that world space normal generator shows up on the model. This is still simply a base color that I can then paint over additionally. But for now, you can see that we're actually starting to get quite a good result on here. Now, let me see if there's something I can do at this point. No. So this is what I would do going for each one. After I do something like that, and I won't go to the last one just for the sake of moving on to the next stage, I could do additional effects on top of everything depending on the style that I want to have. So for example, I'm going to hide the rope for a moment. For example, I can add a layer on top of everything, and I could make it very dark black, and I could add a black mask, and I could then add a generator and do an overall ambient occlusion. And this ambient occlusion is going to only show up in areas like this. Change that to multiply, and then I could simply reduce the value significantly, but I'm creating an overall kind of darkening effect on the whole model like this. After that, if I wanted to, I could do what I was doing before, so I could create a colored highlight based on the world space normal map. Add a black mask, add a generator, and a world space normal map. Let's invert it and change the intensity. And also, let's again change exactly where it's going to be coming from. And now we have this interesting kind of mystical highlight. Let's change our lighting so that it actually looks like something we can use. I think I want something, there we go, we want a dark colored color. And depending on what we choose, the theme of the object changes. See, without it, we had this very purpley blue, mystical, magical look, and then with the red, it starts to look a little bit more dungeony or something to that effect. But essentially, we can play around with this quite a lot. What if I do an overlay? It just darkens it, really. But regardless, there's another effect we can apply on here. Or, if we wanted to, we could change this. I'm going to hide this, actually. We could change this to a position. Actually, position is not good. A light. Let's use a light. We can do a light overall on top of everything. Make it come out from a specific direction. Change the color to something that is more suitable to light. And usually a very faint yellow color is good for simulating sunlight, but that depends on what you're trying to achieve and what kind of sun you're actually engaged with. Let's not make it too bright. Change the attenuation so it's a little more faint. And on top of this, I can, of course, add something like a filter. And this filter could be a blur. And I could just really blur this effect so it doesn't work as hard on top of the color details. But of course, now I'm losing all of that color detail that's capturing the normal information, right? So let's change this to some kind of overlay or something like that so that we can actually still maintain our 3D details. And now we've got a nice little, start of a stylized object. It's kind of like a baby rattle, isn't it? I've just made my peace with that. Or kind of a ring, or a baby rattle ring or something. Anyway, the assets I choose to make for these tutorials are always interesting. But yes, we have this little guy. Let me switch back to material. This is what it looks like in material view. Bland, very not very gray as well. And this is the importance of working in the base color channels. The base color channels allow you to color pick and choose colors and do things based on how you see the colors through the base color, not how does the lighting in the program actually react to what you're making. And in a way, the most control you ever have over texturing is going to be in the base color, because that's something that isn't going to change depending on the program you use, whereas the lighting will. Anyway, that was an introduction to the process that you could use for stylized painting. And in fact, before finishing up, let me just see if I can, let me group these and just call them top effects. Put all of these in here. Oh no, we wanted pass through. Good. If you put layers inside a folder that have different kinds of overlay types, make sure that the folder itself has itself set to pass through so that all of those show up properly. One thing I want to do here, I'm going to show you how you can kind of manually start painting on top of an object if you want to just start adding details yourself. So I'm going to add a solid color here. I'm going to add something like a dark sort of thing, or actually if we're doing metal, let's add something quite bright, black mask, and a paint. And I'm just going to take that out of that folder. It's not meant to be in there. We'll put it in the middle here. And I can grab that paint. And now that I have my brush and I have my base layer set up and all of that, I can grab a brush and I can start to add what I think would be logical kind of little painted details. And how these details show up and what they are will depend on the kind of art style you're trying to emulate and the kind of detail you're trying to make. So for example, if I wanted to kind of emphasize the scratching, for example, I could do something like this, trying to really push this out. I could add some scratching of my own and add details here that I could then add to further. Now, obviously, I don't want this to get rid of the details, as I always say. So an overlay seems to not be working well. What about a screen? One thing I don't like is the fact that you can't actually see what's going to happen before you click these, but you can scroll with your mouse wheel. Value, let's try that. Lower it significantly. And on top of this, I'm going to duplicate that, add another just solid white, get rid of that paint, make it normal, add another paint. Oops, that's a fill. Add a paint, go in here, and manually paint in the little metal border details that would naturally show up when you've got scuffed metal like this. And of course, if I choose to do this on one part of the model, I've got to be consistent with my style and consistent with my details. And I'm going to have to make it show up on all areas of the model where we have cuts and scuffs. If we want it to be a little more faint, I could add a filter that has a blur. And I could very faintly blur this, and then very faintly lower the intensity as well. But you're starting to see that we're starting to paint in some details in here, and I would continue painting them in on the border here. I would continue painting them in at the bottom here as well. If I wanted to, I could just continue that right now, just making sure that I kind of highlight specific scratches and things like this. If you're trying to wonder, okay, well, how am I going to paint my model? How am I going to make my style look a certain way? How am I going to detail the objects that I want to texture? That's all dependent on the object you're texturing. And it's all dependent on the style you're going to be texturing it in, because really it does matter. Look at the reference, look at the concepts that you're using, or look at the art style that you're trying to work towards. Look at the painted art for that art style. How does it look? How do they achieve that result? You have to really analyze the painting, and then you're going to be able to better analyze your own artwork. Let me turn off the blurring for a second. You're going to be able to better analyze your texturing and how you're going to get this effect and how you're going to get this kind of, really particular look. You're starting to get cuts here and there, and depending on the material, you detail different. Let me show you guys a few things. Also, this is a video that I'm gonna send you guys. That's for the next, for another session. So also this.
They just do not stop coming. I'm just bombing my own base at this point.
That's not good. Look, I don't want to edit this video, so that's staying in there. Let's go to ArtStation. Let's go to my collections. And I'm going to show you guys some things. So, for example, let's look at tutorials as well. If I was working on a character for a game similar to this, obviously I would analyze the existing characters, or I would analyze the concept art, and I would look at how it's painted. Obviously, this guy is part of a tutorial and goes through the entire process of how it's textured. If we're looking at something like this, this is again a 3D model, and you can see that it's textured to a specific style and to a certain aesthetic. And in fact, I can even tell you what that aesthetic is based on my assumption. I believe that is Battle Chasers, or at least similar to it. And the way that this comic book and the eventual game actually paints, and the way they do their thing, the way they do their highlights and their shadows, the kind of brushes they use, etc., etc. And there's more things that we can look at. Any concept that you choose to work from is going to have an indication of how it can be textured. Even more realistic concepts like this one, for example, if you wanted to make it in a stylized fashion, you could zoom in and actually look at how the metal is textured and what kind of brushes is used and where the highlights appear. Of course, this is a realistic concept, so you would texture it in a realistic way, but not necessarily. If we look at assets like these and we look at how they're made, like you can see how the highlight is positioned. You can see the colors that are used. You can see where there's little bits of lighter discoloration, where there's shiny areas, where highlights occur, where there's details highlighting the fact that this is cloth, details highlighting the fact that this is metal. There's little scratches, there's ornamentation. On the sword, you can see here methods that they use in their painting to highlight what material this is. You can see how here this skull has a shadow that's pink instead of black. It's colored shadowing, similar to how we were doing in Painter. All of this is information you can use during your stylized texturing process, because in reality, there is no difference between painting in Photoshop and painting the base color of an object in Substance Painter. And that's how some people are able to get incredibly realistic and incredibly interesting Substance Painter textures for stylized assets. It's because they fundamentally can analyze, understand, and even work with Photoshop texturing that they do for concept art. Really valuable skill to kind of understand. Anyway, I hope that was useful, and I'll see you in the next video where we talk a little bit more about the different kinds of texture maps. Hope that was useful. Have a good one.